Electric vehicles are great, aren't they? They're quiet, fun to drive, and make fun whee noises as you make your way down the road. They require less maintenance than internal combustion engine vehicles, are far less expensive to own long term, and assuming you have somewhere to park off-road overnight, can be fueled while you sleep. Despite all these advantages, though, there's one big issue we, the EV industry, haven't yet solved. The price of full-size electric vehicles. Sure, there are some more affordable models out there, but for now, the majority of automakers building EVs are going for high-end, high-performance, high-sticker price models with incredible ranges and super-fast charging capabilities. Even if, in the course of everyday life, the majority of customers rarely need those last two. We're also at a point in history where the EV market is dominated by one company, with others scrabbling to play catch-up, which, while it has its advantages, gives very little real incentive to anyone in the space to drive the price down because they're all so busy chasing the leader. Then, there are practical challenges. We're really not in a place where the economies of scale means that automakers can comfortably make a $25,000 family car with a 300-mile range and a half-hour quick charge time. Yet there are two areas of the EV world where there is a phenomenal and rapid change going on, a change that's already starting to have a massive impact on the number of electrified vehicles hitting the world's roads. They're areas of the EV world, in fact, that are moving so fast that we are all having a hard time keeping up. And last year, they were responsible for more people dumping the pump than any other part of the EV world. Today, I'm going to tell you all about them, why they are ideal for a rapidly growing urban population, and tell you why legislatures around the world risk derailing the adoption of clean, green, personal mobility machines thanks to a quagmire of legalese, no standardisation, and regulations that aren't evolving as our transportation does. But first, a quick reminder that if you like how we cover the world of cleaner, greener, safer and smarter transportation, we would love it if you'd consider hitting subscribe and the notification bell, as well as checking your notification preferences for this very channel. And if you want to go one step further, stick around until the end and I will tell you how to contribute towards our monthly running costs. It's long been proven that a future where we transition the world's fleet from fossil fuel vehicles to electric ones is a healthier one for us all, with less air pollution, fewer cases of severe respiratory problems, and far more energy independence. It's for those reasons and more that the US federal government has just wrapped up a meeting with auto industry CEOs, including Mary Barra and Elon Musk, among others, discussing the future of EV charging networks in the US. It's why the federal government wants Congress to pass the Build Back Better Act, and it's why President Biden recently considered invoking the Defense Production Act to prioritize the production of raw materials for EV battery packs. Other nations around the world are taking similar actions. In fact, there are few economically prosperous nations which have not already implemented or are in the process of implementing some kind of incentive program to encourage EV ownership. And frankly, that's something we should applaud. Although I do wish some incentives were more targeted at households who didn't already earn enough to afford an electric car. After all, we all know that buying a brand new electric car today usually requires you to have a significant amount of cash on hand, or a very good credit rating, which in turn usually relies on you having a decent amount of income to start with which you manage whatever consumer debt you have. For those whose commutes are long, and those who live outside of areas served by public transit, some form of plug-in car might be the only available alternative to an internal combustion engined car. And for those who live in regions where there's a lot of extreme weather, be it severe cold, high rain, wind, or extreme heat, a car may feel like the smartest choice. I mean, I know personally living a good 25 miles outside of Portland, Oregon, halfway up a mountain, with my nearest public transit being a good 6 miles away down a very twisty rural road with no sidewalk or pavement, a car is much more essential to me today than when I used to live in an apartment complex in the middle of suburbia. But let's face it, 259.3 million people in the US, that's 80.7% of the population, live in urban areas, while around 56.5% of the world's population live in urban areas. By 2050, though, an estimated 89% of the US population, 68% of the world's population, is projected to live in urban areas. And that is a massive change from 1950, where just 64% of the US population lived in urban areas and an unimaginably low 29% of the world's population lived there. And yes, I know the world's population was 2.5 billion in 1950 and is more than 3 times that today. But it's also important to note that it wasn't until the 1950s in many parts of the world, those that were still rebuilding from World War II that is, that private automobile ownership became achievable for average people. My point? Many of the world's citizens now live in megacities, or at least massive urban areas, where public transit is available and where personal cars may not always be the cheapest, quickest, or smartest way to get from A to B. At the same time, while nobody really wants to ride public transit during a global pandemic, and yes, despite what you may have heard, COVID-19 is still a pandemic bordering on endemic, there have been some truly incredible improvements in the reliability and capability of affordable micro-mobility solutions. Things like electric scooters, electric skateboards, and electric bicycles. Last year, more electric bicycles were sold in the United States than plug-in hybrids and electric cars combined. This year, with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia causing gas prices to rise, even if there is significant evidence to suggest that in many cases rising gas prices have nothing at all to do with Russia, interest in electric bicycles and electric scooters continues to rise. Except, and this is where we get off our preamble and background and onto the meat of the matter, the rules and regulations around the world into what's okay and what's not okay make owning an electric scooter, electric bicycle, or electric skateboard a bit of a minefield. And to demonstrate, I'm going to look at both Europe and the US for examples. In much of Europe, there's a fairly strict set of regulations over electric bicycles, restricting their maximum speed and total power output, and in some nations, mandating that the electric motors only operate when you are also pedaling. If you want to know more and love some long, complicated, dry regulations, just go ahead and look up EU Directive 2002/24/EC. Go on. I know you want to. Except that directive, which itself comes from a far older set of regulations that predate things like the Sinclair C5, doesn't take into account the massive improvements made in recent years to electric bicycles and scooters. It doesn't really take into account the growth in bicycle-friendly policies around Europe. And it doesn't take into account that a fully grown adult in reasonable health with a lightweight carbon fibre bike can easily exceed the 15 miles per hour limit of EU e-bike legislation with nothing more than a good breakfast and correctly set up steed. And yes, I did say EU, and not all European countries are part of the EU, which, well, it kind of confuses things further, especially on the border between countries that are EU member states and those which aren't, but where both countries have free passage agreements between them. Things are made a whole lot more worse when it comes to electric scooters, e-boards, and other electrically powered wheeled personal mobility devices. Some nations allow them, and some don't. The UK, for example, only allows electric scooters in restricted areas, while in Switzerland, e-scooters are fine, but e-boards are not. And in Switzerland, if you want to have an electric bicycle capable of a speed faster than 45 kilometres per hour, 28 miles per hour, you need an endorsement on your licence. Things are equally complex in the US. Some states allow people to ride electric bicycles without pedal assist, while others require it. Some states have restrictions on top speeds or power output, while others don't. And the same is true for e-scooters and other electric mobility devices. There's frankly massive differences between what you need to ride as well. North Carolina, for example, requires you to register electric scooters with the Department of Motor Vehicles, while 9 states in the Union require you to have an endorsement to safely and legally ride an e-scooter. Further still, some states have minimum age requirements and others don't. As for a helmet, well, it's legally required in some states and not in others. And yes, while some states require you to ride e-scooters on the road with other, more powerful, faster, and much more dangerous vehicles, other states are super cool with you using them on multi-use sidewalks designed for pedestrians, cyclists, and other slower speed vehicles. At this point, I am sure some of you are going, yeah, but each state in the Union is meant to set its own laws. That is part of the beauty of living in the good old USA. Except, well, let's be frank. Those on Capitol Hill and those in their respective state seats of power aren't always the most up-to-date when it comes to legislation and or trends. I mean, just look at the quagmire surrounding autonomous vehicles to see exactly what I mean. And this confusion and lack of homogeneity means that users are never sure what the regulations are, especially if they travel a lot and find themselves in a new city with a scooter share program, as I have done multiple times in the past, and not sure what is allowed and what isn't. That leads to an increased likelihood that you're going to get pulled over by a particularly pernicious law enforcement officer. And if you're like me, that reduces the likelihood you're going to opt to use what would otherwise be a very convenient, quick, and low-carbon method of transportation. Because when you are a minority, you stay away from the cops. Which leads us where? A need for shared planning, regulation, and training for e-scooters and e-bike users. At the start of this piece, I told you that I lived some significant way from public transit, and as such, I usually use my electric car to get around. However, before she moved out when she turned 18, my teenage daughter used to cycle most days using an e-bike from our house to the local town to get to and from her job. And because we've got an e-bike on review right now in the form of the VeloWave Ranger FMTB3 fat tyre bike, I actually availed myself of the opportunity last weekend, when the weather was nice, to ride the 30-mile round trip between my house and an appointment in town on the bicycle. Technically, that e-bike is in that grey area of what is allowed and what's not allowed by Oregon law. For example, it maxes out at 20 miles per hour, 32 kilometers per hour when it's in throttle-only mode, but when pedaling, it will assist up to 28 miles per hour, 45 kilometers per hour. But I also happen to have an e-scooter in my garage right now, which is certainly not compliant with Oregon state law. It has a top speed in excess of 40 miles per hour, 65 kilometers per hour. It's sold with a disclaimer, not for road use warning, that provides manufacturers with a get-out-of-jail-free card on the legality of its use. But you and I know that people buy and use scooters like that on the road. E-bikes and e-scooters are both sold with caveats and exceptions to ensure the onus is on the purchaser to check that everything is legal. But honestly, when was the last time you checked the legality of a car you just purchased? And with so many models flooding the market and so many different regulations, it's not always easy for customers to figure out what's okay and what isn't. And that leads to its own problems. I've ridden that e-scooter at 40 plus miles per hour on a private road and on a dirt track, fully kitted out in motorcycle gear. And frankly, it felt fine. I'm aware of how comical I must have looked, but then I am an ATGAT rider, all the gear, all the time. But then I'm also a motorcyclist with a motorcycle endorsement who learned to ride in the UK, where regulations are far stricter about motorcycle endorsements. I understand how to move, and I understand how to control something on two wheels at that kind of speed. But I'm not sure I would have felt the same way if that was my first electric scooter. Can I tell you where this particular scooter is road legal? No. Could I tell you where something half as powerful is road legal? No. All I know is that where I live, there are some pretty big restrictions on what e-scooters can and can't do, and that's leaving people who could potentially benefit from them either unsure if they should buy them or not, or taking a lot of legal risk. So what am I suggesting? A licensing program for all electrified personal mobility? Well, no, not quite. While I believe that higher-powered e-scooters like the one in my garage and e-bikes should have similar requirements to gasoline-powered scooters and mopeds, I think what we actually need is some kind of tiered system that is easy for customers to understand. I think, frankly, the onus needs to be on manufacturers, not users, to get vehicles approved for particular use cases and markets. And I think legislators around the world need to collaborate on setting out achievable and safe regulations for what is effectively a brand new, groundbreaking form of transportation. Simply put, correct training and standard setting can also reduce the number of accidents involving road users, be they car drivers, motorcyclists, or e-scooters and e-bike riders. Offer no training and no standards, and people tend to make the rules up as they go. This means they often take risks and do stuff that is less than optimal for their survival. But as motorcycle training programs around the world have shown time and time and time again, the more training someone is offered and partakes in, and the more that they are coached on their skills by experts, the better they become as a rider and road user, and the less likely they are to be meeting the wonderful Kate Walton-Elliott or her numerous counterparts around the world in triage at their local hospital. And believe me, if you think that Kate is sarcastic on camera on this channel, wait until you meet her or some of her colleagues down the local emergency room. Over-legislation, though, can also result in extra cost for manufacturers and end users, and it can also put people off ownership. Today's global patchwork quilt of legislation is basically a chocolate teapot, developing a safe, easily accessible standard for e-scooters and their riders, basic safety requirements, and a shared set of acceptable places and routes where they can be safely ridden, could lift what I think personally is one of the biggest challenges to electric scooter adoption. Sure, it will not be for everyone, and many places in the world would be truly miserable to e-scoot to work for most of the year. But given most e-scooters and e-bicycles offer ranges in excess of what the average commute is, and most people drive to work in hulks of metal with nobody else in the vehicle beside them, I think it's time to rethink that daily commute. And with gas now hitting record levels, spending anywhere from $500 to $2,500 on a scooter or e-bike and leaving the car at home 5 days a week could lead to some significant savings all round. And it's also far cheaper than buying an EV. Not to mention the improvements to air quality. Have you got an e-scooter, e-skateboard, or e-bicycle? And do you commute on it? And would you appreciate more clarity on what's okay and what's not okay? I would love to know your experiences. That's it for today. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to leave your thoughts below or in our free to join Discord chat room. There are links in the description. I'll be back really soon, but of course, don't forget, if you want a generalised news roundup in the world of cleaner, greener, safer and smarter vehicles, do check out our news roundup show every weekend. And don't forget, we also produce daily videos on this network for you all to enjoy, ranging from deep dives and features to tutorials, unboxing, and reviews. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this channel and our other channel, Transport Evolved Take 2, and give that bell a gentle ding, and you'll be told when our next video goes live. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew go out to the folk on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month supporters. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons, that's Chris Maxwell, Bennett Elder, Brian Newton, Dave Kitchen, Michael Goad, Ricky Leon, Andrew Martin, Guido Drahota, Brophy Wolf, Tesla and the Gong, Gordon C, Stephen O'Donoghue, Carl Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Raging Fellows, Rory Litwin, Anonymous Freak, Jim Burness, Chris Centaur and Denny Hyde. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month supporters: Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, Joe Bresney, JP Fagerback, Will Graylin, Matthew Drobnak, John Lyons, Christopher Lee Jones, Andrew Glenn, Paul Conway, Laura Reynolds, Ellery Hensley, and Ian. If you would like to be part of this amazing family, you can join Patreon at the link below, hit the join button below to support us on YouTube, or show us your support through Bitcoin, Ko-fi, or our cool swag store. And if you are unable to support us financially, please know that just watching the video in its entirety and sharing it with your friends, family, and co-workers really makes a difference, because the more views we get, the better our ad revenue. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving.